Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, November 4th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Northwestern game is tomorrow, the game against Michigan in 22 days. Well, if it's Friday, it must be time for one of our most popular episodes of the week. Ross Fulton, one of our X's and O's gurus at BuckeyeHuddle.com, joins me this morning. Ross, let's just get right into it. I think we need to start with the big question a lot of Ohio State fans are asking right now. Ross, what is wrong with the Ohio State rushing attack?
Well, I guess, there's a few things going on there, and it's not like they are getting stopped all the time, right? I mean, the biggest problem is that they're having too many 0 or negative yard run plays. And so, there's a combination against Penn State. Some of it was that Penn State was certainly playing them to run their base stretch or outside wide zone, whatever term you want to use, run to the boundary. And they were using some zone blitzes that I discussed in my article, or creeper pressures, I guess would be the right term, to stunt and slant to the boundary. And Ohio State, the offensive line at times wasn't doing a great job identifying how they should handle that. And frankly, they need more out of TreVeyon Henderson. They had several plays blocked up. He slipped in the backfield. There are other times he didn't see the hole or he wasn't patient enough. And so, I think, I know that Ryan Day got a little defensive on Tuesday talking about it, but I do think he's not wrong in the sense that there were times where things just could have been executed better. Whether that's on the offensive line or from Henderson. But I do think there also is something to the fact that they were doing a better job this year of diversifying the run game a little bit. Michigan really hurt Penn State with gap run plays, power, counter tray, plays where you're pulling a guard, or two offensive linemen. And Ohio State didn't run one of those until Henderson's last touchdown, when they ran power down on the goal line, and then they ran it there, and then they ran it again the next drive for 12 yards. So they ran inside zone from pistol twice in the first half for 9 yards a pop and didn't return to it. And so I do think there's a little bit of diversifying the run game, finding what works, continuing to use play action when you're an under center or a pistol. The things that we've talked about. I guess the worst case scenario would be that they did that stuff earlier in the year to try to revert back to what their base, wanting to run the ball from those running stretch from those sets all the time against, quote unquote, good teams. And you can't do that. You got to stick with it, but it's hard to say that off of one sample size. So would certainly benefit Ohio State if Mayan Williams returns. And would certainly benefit them if they continue to do what they had been doing for much of the year.
Well, and you mentioned Ryan Day's press conference, which made me think about, he got kind of defensive almost. I mean, you mentioned him being a defensive in another context, but he got sort of defensive about the idea that they were too predictable, and, that in pistol, they almost always run. And if the running back is, if they're in shotgun and running back's offset, they're almost always throwing. And, His answer was one where, I went back and listened to it later because I took it as wow, he's being really defensive. I'm not sure why he's being, why he's saying this has no bearing on anything. It's well, I don't know if he was saying there's no bearing on anything or more so that this was not the core cause of the issues that they're having on Saturday. How did you, I assume you listened to the press conference. How did you take that and did you agree with what he was saying?
I think you're correct in saying that he was saying that's not the core cause of what's happening. He definitely came ready to fire back. He knew that this was coming. And I actually do agree with him. He's we ran the ball out of pistol. I could only find 4. He said they ran it 5 times, and they ran it effectively, I think 3 out of the 4 times. And as I said, I'm always of the belief that if you find something that's working, keep using it until the opponent stops it. That inside zone run from pistol worked great twice in the first half, and I don't know why it went away. They did run inside zone on Henderson's 41-yard touchdown run. It was just from the shotgun, so it's not like they totally abandoned inside zone. But I agree. I agree and disagree with them, right? So it's okay to have tendencies. Ohio State is never going to be a 50-50 run pass from the pistol or shotgun, and that's totally fine. Most offenses are not going to be that way in college. You have to do it enough that the threat is there. Like in particular, like one play, like it stood out. They tried to run duo twice in this game, and like everyone should know what duo looks like when Ohio State's going to run it. Like Emeka Egbuka is going to go in that short motion right next to the wing, next to Mitch Rossi, and like Penn State was obviously ready for that, and their DBs like kind of jumped around the blocks, and they had 2 negative plays off of it. It's like the second time they did that, I was like, all right, here comes play action. And they were going to do it for like -3 yards. Now, it didn't. That was in the fourth quarter. They made up for it with the 3rd and 10 throw to Harrison against cover 0. But, I do think that there's, like anything else, like you just got to pick your spots to use play action. And I'm personally of the opinion that they try to run it too much in short yardage. Like there's no rule that you have to run it in 3rd and 2. Like I know people made a big deal about that all offseason, and at the time I said this is silly. Like you can throw it there too, and like NFL teams throw it all the time. And Ohio State's a great passing offense, so I know Day also said that like that 3rd and 1 ate him up, and like again bad cut by Henderson. They didn't block the slanty nose guard correctly, so like all the problems. Like you can certainly say like they didn't execute well there. There's also a case to be made that like throwing the ball there would be okay too.
One of the other things that Day talked about after the game, and Day has not faced a lot of criticism, which is one of those things that happens when you're number 1 in the country in scoring offense and rushing, and total offense and all that kind of stuff. But, he did come in for a little bit of criticism on Twitter, which, surprise, surprise, during the game, but also, for after the game as well, in terms of how many of those bubble screens, or just how they were just going horizontal a lot in the pass game when it felt like stuff was open downfield. And, especially the middle of the field, it felt like over and over, rewatching on the broadcast, they were putting those graphics up with that, the huge red circle in the middle of the field, and there's no one there. So, did you agree with what Ryan Day was talking about with spreading teams sideline to sideline, and that being, an important part of why the middle of the field is open, and you have to keep doing it even if it's not necessarily working? Was that something you would agree with?
Yes, because it's part of the run game. I mean, they can't, particularly without a running quarterback, like you have to keep people out of the box. So like most of those bubble screens are attached to run plays. And so that's just Stroud reading the leverage or numbers pre-snap. And if you have 3-on-2, you're going to throw it. I mean, I at some level, like Cade Stover, Julian Fleming, Marvin Harrison, like these are big, strong athletes. Like they should be able to block corners in space. Like, so I don't blame them for like, it's there, you miss one. It's like, okay, well, surely the next time they're going to get a block, and then they get beat again. So like, at some level, like people do have to do their job. People are happy to criticize the offensive line when they miss blocks. Like those guys need to block. And if you don't do that, they are going to stack the box. Now, I do think that there were 2 where they just called them automatics. One, it was a 3rd and 5, and Penn State was in cover 0. And at the time, I was kind of like, that's questionable. I mean, I get the thought process is like it's cover 0, you get 1 block, Egbuka could be gone. There's no safety help, and they whiffed again. So. I do think, again, that they maybe took a little too long getting to the middle of the field. There were some opportunities, though, like in the second quarter where, like, receiver spacing wasn't great. So, like, there is execution blame to go around. But, like, those reliefs have to be part of the run game. Or, they're gonna really struggle running the football. So they just have to do a better job.
All right, and then on the defensive side of the ball, they gave up some big plays, and I think we have come to sort of understand that is just going to be part of the trade-off with Jim Knowles' defense. Is you're going to give up 4, 5, 6 big plays a game, and the trade-off is they're not going to get a whole lot of yards on most of the other plays. So that has worked out okay for Ohio State so far this year. But some of the big plays you saw against Penn State, the long Parker Washington touchdown, they had 2 guys there and they just couldn't get them on the ground, for example. Is that a concern moving forward as Ohio State's going to eventually be playing better competition even than Penn State? Or were those plays to you just kind of weird one-offs that you can sort of dismiss as just sort of, well, if 2 guys are there and don't make the tackle, is that a problem? Or is that just kind of like that stuff happens sometimes?
No, I would consider that a problem. I mean, you got to make the tackle. Like, I thought that was a pretty weak tackle attempt by J.K. Johnson, to be frank, when you just throw your shoulder at somebody. I thought that play, they sort of telegraphed the cover zero a little bit long. But you still got to make the tackle. I mean, I think so you can separate out that one or just the tackling issues in general with, the other thing that was catching them was they were having some route distribution issues, particularly on, I guess, Penn State's first touchdown drive and cover 3. Again, I think they sort of need to get the corner situations figured out. It's just unfortunate that they've had so many injuries. The corner situation opposite Denzelberg. And they did play more cover 1 in the second half as a result, I think, of handling some of those switch routes and stuff that Penn State's doing. But you are correct in the sense that, like, Knowles, they are a heavy one high team. So they do have that in common with what Ohio State has been in previous seasons. So there are going to be passing game opportunities. Like, Knowles is going to stop the run first. So I'm not like saying that it's a gigantic problem, but there's certainly stuff that they need to clean up. And I mean, that is probably partially a reflection of the fact that this was the first, perhaps legitimate passing offense they've faced.
And as far as the run game goes, sometimes I'll look at the stat sheet at the end of the game and go, yeah, I would have guessed, within 0.2 of a yard, exactly how many yards, per carry or yards per attempt or something the opposing team had or Ohio State had. This was a weird one because it felt like Penn State ran the ball much better than I was expecting them to. But they've still finished with 4 yards per rush. And they had, I think, one rush longer than 7 or 8 yards all day long, which is, great. You're not giving up big plays in the run game. But they also felt like it was just a long series of 4, 5, 6 yards per, for a team that hasn't really been able to do that consistently. Penn State was a lot of 0s, 1s, and 2s, and then they'd hit a 60. So, so you didn't give up a 60, but then you gave up a bunch of 4s and 5s instead of 1s and 2s. So, is that a concern? And feel free to view this through the lens of Michigan is on the schedule in 3 weeks. So with that on, in the back of your mind, is that a concern, or is that just, if you're not giving up big plays, you're doing okay?
Yeah, I mean, I tended to be towards the latter category. Like, I know I saw some people be like, oh, like Mike Yursich, like, was his own worst enemy by not keep running it. Like, you can't just like keep trying to run the ball down the field for 3 yards a carry. Like, eventually you got to hit like, they'd maybe hit like a 5-yard run, but then they get like a 1-yard run. And, like, you have to try to generate offense. I think that we all do this from an Ohio State perspective, right? And it's like, the other team that has good coaches too and good players, and Penn State, like, I thought they had a good scheme in terms of trying to out leverage Ohio State to one side or the other. And they're 4-2-5 or catch the down safety opposite. And so, I tended to think Ohio State gave up yards running when they were down a man in the box, or there were like situations like Penn State used some unbalanced and ran bash against them and, hadn't really shown that. Or, like they catch a corner having to be like the extra defender. And I think, Penn State's like, their running backs are good too. Like they they broke a lot more tackles than Travion Henderson did on Saturday, like tough tackles. So we can get into Michigan. I mean, it's obviously a challenge. Like Blake Corum's very good. The game, it's not going to be that much of a different game plan. Like you have to play single high and force Michigan to throw the football because you saw again on Saturday, like when they do throw, like McCarthy he just wants to get it out underneath quickly. And, no one's really forced them to throw it downfield. Their wide receivers are, they're fine. Ronnie Bell's a good player. Runner Wilson's fast, but like they obviously are a run first team. So, the good news for Ohio State is that like Knowles is going to stop the run first and foremost. So like if Ohio State does the same thing against Michigan's running game as it does against Penn State's, it'll be just fine. Like, it's if you're limiting explosives and forcing them to gain chunks like that, then you'll be okay. So it's really a question of like being able to get the fits correctly based on like, unbalanced or pulling guards and some of the issues we talked about with last year.
All right, and we're talking about Michigan, and I don't think I've said the word Northwestern since the countdown to the game at the very top of the show. And the reason for that is, well, there's not a lot of meat left on the Ohio State schedule before that game on November 26th. So, as you're looking at the Northwestern, Indiana, Maryland games coming down the home stretch and the lead up to that Michigan game, what is something that you could see? The question is, like, how much can you read into anything when you're playing a team as bad as Northwestern? So, what would be instructive to you? Like, what was something you could see at some point in the next few weeks, one way or the other, good or bad, that would make a significant difference in what you think will happen in that Michigan game?
Yeah, so I definitely want to distinguish out Maryland from the other two. I mean, I think Maryland's like, again, it obviously matters if Talia Tagovailoa is playing. But I think they're like 24th in SP+, which is probably like the third best team Ohio State will have played this year. And they can obviously throw the football. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, and it's at Maryland. Northwestern, by contrast, I think is like 97. I mean, they're going to be the worst team Ohio State plays this season. And I don't know if you've heard of something called weather before, but it exists in Chicago in November. And so, obviously we'll have to see how it ends up playing out during the game. I mean, the things I will be looking for is, like, again, how does Ohio State, how diverse is the run game? Like, how do they handle play action out of pistol and under center? How do they clean up some of these run game issues? And then, we'll all caveat that by saying, well, are they going to, was that just done because they're trying to break tendencies and use Northwestern for that purpose versus actually, planning to do that against Michigan? So of the three games, I think that Indiana will test them some, and just in terms of what they do schematically, like, they'll be happy to blitz and throw bodies at the line of scrimmage and, like, create negative plays in the run game. Like they did that to Michigan. And so that'll provide a challenge. And then, obviously Maryland will be frankly, like, is a better pass offense than Michigan is. So that will obviously pose its own challenges. And then, by the same token, like, Michigan versus Illinois will be interesting. It's at Michigan, so that kind of negates it somewhat. But Illinois is, may have the best defense in the country, and they play cover one like 70% of the time. And so they'll put like 9 guys in the box. And so we'll see what happens. And I think that'll be pretty instructive for Ohio State.
And just in case you were curious, because I was, Talia Tagovailoa, Mike Loxley says he will play this weekend, or is expecting him to play this weekend. Now, we've seen injury expectations not come to fruition at various times for various teams this fall. But so, yes, it looks more likely than not that Talia Tagovailoa will play in that Ohio State-Maryland game, which, yes, that definitely makes that a much more interesting game for sure. So, Ross, thank you for joining us, and we will have much more on the Ohio State, much more than the not much we talked about them there, much more on the Ohio State-Northwestern game coming up Friday. We will be, Kevin, Tony, and I are headed to Evanston on Friday afternoon. We'll have our usual Friday live show at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. The pregame show will be there as well. And then, of course, postgame, also, as soon as that gun sounds, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. We'll have the full coverage live from Ryan Field, as well as insight and analysis from our team of experts, live postgame coverage, assuming the media Wi-Fi allows. Road games are always an adventure for the teams and for us as well as media. So, we're looking forward to that. But, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. And, of course, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Ross's piece, he mentioned it earlier, fantastic every week. Great insight, great analysis. Lots of little short video clips too. So, when he's talking about something, you can actually see it and then rewind it and watch it again. And I usually watch most of them 2 to 3 times to make sure I'm seeing all the stuff that he's talking about. That's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.